And like, think about that. Without that source of crowdfunding, I would have been completely screwed. I'm
Yeah.
telling you, like, I may not be free right now.
Three, two, one.
Let me just jump in. Can you introduce yourself to our audience and share a bit about your background in medicine? Now, you are an MD. What's your background in medicine as a doctor?
Yeah, well, my name is Eithan Haim, and it's a privilege to be on with
Yeah.
you. But yeah, I went to college in Florida at the University of South Florida, medical school, Florida Atlantic University. But I did my residency training in general surgery.
Okay.
So, that's that 5 year long process of Baylor College of Medicine in
Okay.
Houston, Texas, which is one of the, best surgery programs in the country just because, you have all the hospitals you can possibly ask for, right? Like these big cancer centers, big children's hospital, the trauma hospital, which is the best in the country, which means it's also the best in the world. And then I finished my training in June 2023. And
Okay.
then right now I'm working as just a general surgeon in a small town outside of Dallas.
Okay. Fantastic. So for those of you that are watching, don't know the backstory. Ethan, you came out as a whistleblower to the hospital, the medical group that you were a part of practicing at, for some of the practices that they were doing that were, I think they were illegal. Texas had passed laws against some of their policies, and they were breaking the law, and you found out about it. So just speak to the issues that you uncovered there in Texas while you were working.
Yeah, well, I would argue that doing these interventions, hormones, blockers, or surgeries like the reconstruct or really deconstructive surgeries like top surgery or bottom surgery has always been illegal because you're doing these procedures based on a fraudulent basis. So you're not informing patients. So I mean that's kind of a separate issue, but
Sure.
um, when I was a resident, a surgical resident at Baylor College of Medicine, one of the hospitals we worked at the most was Texas Children's Hospital, which is the biggest children's hospital in the world, but also one of the most prestigious. So in March of 2022, the hospital had gave a very public statement saying that they were going to shut down their transgender program because of the potential legal risks, right? Like the possible criminal
Sure.
ramifications.
Right.
Those words. And the reason they said that is because a few weeks earlier, the Attorney General of Texas, Ken Paxton, had issued an opinion saying that it could be investigated as child abuse. Right. So it kind of
Okay.
makes their statement make sense, right? Like a
Sure.
couple weeks after Paxton says that, they're like, hey, we're shutting this down. We're
Right. We
not
don't want
doing
to
it
get involved.
here.
Yeah. Right.
Yeah. They take the sign off the door. And that's what I realized is that over the next couple of months in 2022, when I was working there, right, and a bunch of my colleagues were working there, I find out that, first of all, they have a transgender program because I didn't even know that at the time, but also that they were lying about it. And I
Hmm.
knew this because I was working at the hospital. The people who were doing the surgeries told me they were doing it.
Oh, really?
And yeah, and for me, I didn't even believe it that
Wow.
this was happening because it was so crazy. Like the biggest children's hospital in the world, one of the most prestigious, lying about something this big. Like this is a children's hospital. This is a big issue, right? You
Right.
can't just lie about something like that and like pretend everything's kosher. That's not okay.
Sure.
So it took me months to even like believe it. But then in January of 2023, that's when I saw a grand rounds lecture at the hospital, which is a grand rounds lecture is one of the most prestigious lecture series the hospital has,
Okay.
where the directors of the transgender program were speaking at the grand rounds. And this is the important topics the hospital wants to cover, right? And this is the
Really?
biggest pediatrics department in the entire world. So this is a
Wow.
big deal what topics they choose to cover.
Sure.
And this was a program that supposedly didn't exist, but the directors of the transgender clinic are speaking at grand rounds. They're talking about their algorithmic approach to manipulating, mutilating, and sterilizing healthy young children.
Oh, that's
And yeah, so at that point, it was like, no, so this is real. Like
Right.
They actually have a transgender program, but they're lying about it because at the same time, too, the hospital website didn't have any indication that
Okay.
this program existed, which is very atypical because even the smallest programs at like a big children's hospital have a website that people
Sure.
can log on to, do clinic visits, all that.
Yeah.
So I started reaching out to journalists, and it took me 5 months to get a hold of Christopher Rufo because most journalists just didn't
Okay.
believe me, or they thought, like, who's this, a-hole? Like, he's no one. I so when I get in touch with Rufo in May of 2023, he sees the meaning of this story that's really big. So we verify it, and also, he tells me that this law in Texas is about to get voted on, SB 14. And that was the law that was going to ban these interventions in the state of Texas, the pediatric gender interventions. So the
Okay.
story comes out May 16th, 2023. And then it's all over the news. It blows up. And I'm the anonymous whistleblower in that story. Within 24 hours, the uh, Texas Senate votes to pass the law with bipartisan support, partially in response to our story coming out the day before.
Okay.
And then a couple days later, another whistleblower comes out, someone who works in the clinic, and just confirms the horrors that were going on behind closed doors. And that whistleblower has since gone public too, because
Okay.
the FBI showed up to her house and tried to intimidate and terrorize her. But that's a separate story.
Yeah.
And
So
then
how did that happen for, because I mean, that's where this heads is the FBI ends up and showing up to your place. How did they figure it was you? Like, how did that come about? When did you realize that they actually came to your home?
Yeah, yeah. So a month later, on June 23rd, 2023, about a month after the story came out, it was a Friday, the day of my graduation from surgical training, right? One of the most important days of my life. Your family's there. It's a few hours before the ceremony. I get a knock on the door, and there's two armed HHS agents standing outside. And they tell me that they're investigating a case regarding medical records. So in that moment, like I just completely freak out, but I knew exactly what they were there for. So I invite them in because I freak out. It's much harder to
Right.
to like not invite these people in. You kind of have to prepare yourself for it.
Sure.
And they sit down and they start preparing for an interview. But thank God my wife's an attorney. She's actually a federal prosecutor
Oh, well,
at
there we
DOJ.
go. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. So she had just been hired at the time. And she pulls me aside and we're like, no, bad idea to talk to these agents. But before they leave, they hand me a target letter telling me that I'm the target of a criminal investigation. And it's signed by a assistant U.S. attorney. Her name is Tina Ansari at the United States Department of Justice.
Okay.
And what we had realized later is that this was, the hotbed of corruption in the Southern District in Houston, right? These are people who are completely ideologically captured
Right.
because later in the story, she admits to my attorneys, and my attorneys put this down in writing to Congress that, she sent agents to my home without even looking at the evidence. The first thing she did was threaten my wife, on a phone call with my attorneys, right?
Really? Wow.
Yeah, yeah.
Crazy. So what were they coming after you for? What were their charges? What were they saying happened, and how were you responding to that, reacting to that?
Yeah, so it was wild because the first phone call my attorneys had with Tina Ansari, she had no idea what she was investigating, and she admitted this. She had to get off the phone call multiple times, talk to the
Really?
agents. She thought
It's
she was under the
crazy.
impression that
It's
I
crazy.
released, yeah, she was under the impression I released patient names, which obviously, if you just have to look at it to see it, right?
Yeah.
Like
Yeah.
the information I released is completely redacted, HIPAA compliant. It's the same information that hospitals release to news agencies about infectious diseases,
Okay.
redacted patient information,
Okay.
data, right? So, of course, you know, completely legal, but she's fishing for some crazy,
Sure.
point to the personal, point to the crime, right? That kind of situation.
Yep.
But over the next couple of months, right, she kind of reveals how insane she really is, because she said that she was in contact with these transgender families and that she's very sympathetic, which is a conflict of interest. It's like you can't just
Right.
like pursue investigations because like you feel sorry for someone. And then she says, the real victims are the hospital and the physicians who we exposed as
Oh my,
lying.
wow.
But the
Okay.
worst thing, this happened over the course of the next couple of months because I was still anonymous. I didn't want to take my story public.
Yeah.
But it was in October of 2023, 4 months later, that she told my attorneys that we're going to, like that, even if she's going to lose, she's going to take me to a jury trial, even on a technicality, even if she's going to lose. And at that point, the implication was obvious. This
Right.
was not about justice. She was going
Oh,
to destroy me.
lawfare to the
So,
max.
yeah, so I had no option because at that point we had already gone through our entire savings, retirement, investments, everything. We had zero money,
Wow.
over $250,000. So if they were going to indict me, then we had to get ready for it. So that's when I decided to take my story public in January of 2024.
Uh, January of 2024. Okay, so January, so a year ago, just over a
Yeah.
year ago.
And the indictment only came out in June of 2024, a few months after that.
Okay. Wow.
Yeah.
So I'm sure this had massive ramifications for you. You're a doctor. This is all coming out. What were the ramifications for you for your career, where you were working, your reputation, your personal life? Like, how did this affect that?
Yeah, so it was wild because we knew that the government was aggressively going after me in order to destroy my career.
Right.
And this is not only the government, but also people within the hospital, right? Because they had leaked my name to people they knew would do something about it, right? So
Okay.
while I was anonymous, during those 6 months between June and January 2024, when I took my story public, people had started writing reviews of my doctor profile, accusing me of mutilating patients, that I should be in prison, but even saying I was sexually abusing patients behind closed doors, like
Wow.
in clinic rooms, which is the worst possible thing you can do,
Sure.
right? And we
Right.
knew this was bogus because of the language that was being used. And I hadn't been seeing patients because I finished my residency and hadn't started my job yet. But also, we hired a couple Navy SEALs, ex-Navy SEALs who were good tech guys to do an investigation. We found the IP addresses, and we know for a fact it's someone we know who it is. And that's going to come out at the right time. But it's someone in the hospital who's connected to this story in the
Okay.
transgender clinic.
Okay.
So it was that person who was writing these reviews about me.
Okay.
But also, right, the whole goal is to make me seem like a criminal, so that I get fired from my job because I this was all happening the first couple of months I started my new career, right?
Right.
I was a new surgeon in this small town in Dallas. But thankfully my job, it's a small town, so people are they're like very good people, so they stood behind me the whole time.
Oh, really? Well, that's fantastic to hear.
Yeah.
That's awesome. So so you're being attacked, you've got these prosecutors coming after you, you get this legal battle that's ensuing, and there's a lot happening. You're spending your life savings trying to defend yourself against just doing the right thing. And you end up, or what ends up coming about is a crowdfunding campaign on GiveSendGo, which is part of the reason why we're having a discussion here, because it was a very, very successful campaign. Raised over $1 million, I think like close to $1.3 million. How did that campaign start? What was your reaction as you saw that grow? I mean, just give give me the skinny on all of that.
I mean, that's what probably one of the most remarkable things because, from the very beginning, we knew, like, because my wife's an attorney, she's a federal prosecutor. We knew, and people had told me this, it took me a while to believe it. When it comes down to a federal trial, especially in a corrupt case like this with a corrupt judge, a corrupt prosecutor, the system's corrupt, especially against someone like me.
Yeah.
The truth doesn't matter. What matters is how good your attorneys are and what evidence you can get into court. So what that requires is a huge amount of money, which is
Okay.
exactly what we didn't have. Because when I took my story public, we had a total of like $500 in our bank account, which is kind of like it's
Versus,
similar to what it is now. But like
yeah.
so we start this crowdfunding campaign in January of 2024 when I take my story public, raise up to like $350,000, which was amazing because it helped cover the costs of the initial parts of my attorneys looking into my case and establishing the legal theories in order to defend me when the indictment came. And how critical that was, I cannot overstate because this was the first time in American history the DOJ was charging someone with HIPAA, and instead of patients being the victim, right, because HIPAA is supposed to protect patient privacy,
Right. Yeah.
they were saying it's hospitals and doctors who were lying that were the victims. So the amount of work my lawyers had to do to be able to defend against that was immense. I mean, this is like a $6 million case at any other law firm, but my
Yeah.
attorneys were able to do it for around 2 million.
Wow.
And so we still owe like a lot of money, but when the indictment came out, that was the most amazing thing because within about 3 weeks, we raised over $1 million. And
Absolutely insane.
like think about that. That's without that source of crowdfunding, I would have been completely screwed. I'm
Yeah.
telling you, like I would have like I may not be free right now. This
Right.
story would be completely different. If it was GoFundMe, they would have kicked me off the platform. I mean, these people are totally corrupt. There's no
Yeah.
chance I would have survived on there. The
Yeah.
only reason I'm free today and my daughter has a father in her life is because of people like you at GiveSendGo.
Wow. What, man, that is such a powerful story a- about the power of the crowd, about that the hope that comes from community. I think people don't realize this part, a give send go story. I'm not going to get too much really into it, but there's a similar situation, uh, similar in the sense that everybody wanted to cancel this campaign, and they did for this guy, and all the other platforms like the one that you named canceled the campaign on this guy. He didn't know about Give Send Go at the time, and he was under a similar legal battle where they were coming after him. And it was politically motivated, it was ideologically motivated, and because he didn't know about Give Send Go at the time, this was right before we really got our push into the mainstream. He was hopeless. He was a military veteran, hopeless, absolutely hopeless. And so when they made a decision to press charges against him, what he did was he put a gun in his mouth and he blew his head off. He committed suicide. And I think that there's the underlying thread here on many of this is when you deny people access to basic fundamental realities of how our system is set up, which is due process, presumption of innocence until proven guilty in a court of law, not public opinion. You rob people of their dignity. You rob them of any access to hope, to idea of that something might be better down the road. And his reality for us, because he found out about Give Send Go a day too late. Well, a day, and then he found out about his grand jury that came down and he committed suicide. And we were so distraught because here was a young man who served our country and he kills himself because he had been deplatformed from everybody. And we're like, this is not going to happen again. Give Send Go, we're going to stand for hope that people can see the outpouring of support, just like you mentioned. So many people support. I'm looking at your campaign now. I just pulled it up. Over 16,000 people have given, over 2,000 prayer messages sent. Like that is massive engagement from this global audience. I'm sure it wasn't even just here in the US. There's
Yeah.
probably people from all over the world that were engaging with it.
Yeah, I mean it's global. And just to take it back like to January of 2024 when, and really like the 2 months prior to that,
Mm.
like my wife and I were making this monumental decision. we're both very private people. We didn't have social media. Like we had like a small friend group, and we're like, all right, well, we're gonna have to thrust ourselves like off the edge of a cliff, right?
Oh,
Enter
yeah.
this world that's completely unknown,
Right.
that is completely dark, that's terrifying, where there's a very high likelihood that we're going to get consumed and completely destroyed.
Yeah.
But there were like a few photons of light, like in that world of darkness. And one of those was the knowledge that there was something like Give, Send, Go, where if we did raise money, it wouldn't be stolen from us.
Right.
And because we knew without that, I was completely cooked,
Yeah.
right? There was no alternative because
Yeah.
without the ability to raise money to defend myself, there is no defense. Like
Right.
there's none. It's completely cut off. So like
Yeah.
when we jump off this cliff, right? Like in the beginning, it's free fall. Like you're just falling and you don't know where you're going to land or how you're going to land.
Yeah.
But then you see this outpouring of support, and then all of a sudden you go from free fall into like, and then you start flying, and then it's like, oh my God, like look at all these people. And then every single night you read these messages, and it's like, I mean, no joke, every night we read the messages.
Wow.
At the hardest times we read the messages. It was the most amazing thing because like every night, like my parents would send me like screenshots of
Wow.
Give, Send, Go. And they're like,
Really?
oh my
That's
God, look at what
awesome.
these people are saying. And like all the time.
Yeah,
And you're
that's
like, oh my, I
awesome.
can't believe it. Like old friends from like I knew from elementary school were
Really? Oh,
saying
that's
it. Yeah,
crazy.
yeah.
That's so
People
cool.
from TCH were saying it. People who were like detransitioners, people who were famous conservative influencers and old friends and neighbors
Wow.
and coworkers and people
Yeah.
from across the globe. And like that's it's amazing because like this we were able to fight the most powerful federal leviathan in human history,
Mm,
overcome the craziest of odds, and we were able to win, but not only win, but make them look like fools.
right.
And likely they're going to be held accountable in very significant ways.
Yeah. Well, I hope so. I mean, there's accountability needs to take place. It sounds like even with my kids, um, you they apologize for the wrong that they did, and it's like, yeah, you know what? That's just not enough. There's got to be some punishment, like
Yeah.
because you know what? It's great that you confess, like you've said you're sorry, but there's ramifications, and you need to know that this is not acceptable, and it's not going to be acceptable. So I agree. That's an absolutely incredible message of hope for people to now know there is a platform like GiveSendGo where community can exist in the midst of the most disastrous moments. Um, so this message is going to go out. I'm just thinking about it. I'm going to put it out on various social channels and probably even in email. Um, you have thousands of people that have followed your campaign, shared, donated, all of that. What is your direct message to them? Because we'll probably send them a clip from you saying, hey, I just want to give you a couple words. What would you say to those people that have donated, that have shared, that have prayed for your campaign? What would you say to them that we're going to send out?
Yeah, I I don't think there are words to express the depth of our gratitude for what those people did to
Mhm.
sacrifice a part of their lives to help us in our fight. There really isn't t a way to say thank you to that because it's such a big thing for them to do. I think what I will say is that the sacrifice they made, I will repay with my own efforts to continue this fight and hold these people accountable because
Mm,
these people put their faith in us because they saw something in us and they believed in us. And I have to repay that faith with my own action and perseverance to make sure that these people can never do this again.
yeah. So, we see public campaigns on Give, Send, Go often where it's not just a small community of people that are really invested. So you have give a scenario. You have a small tragedy in a small, community. Everyone's invested in that situation. So the donation size, the average donation typically tends to be a little bit higher because everyone knows the family involved and their friends. But when you have public campaigns where it's a little less centralized, it's more decentralized, and there's people that you don't even know, they've never met you before, and they're donating, the average goes down quite a bit because, they're just giving their $5, $10. They don't know you too well. What just looking at your campaign page and seeing what you've raised versus the amount of people given, you actually have a really high average donation compared to what most public campaigns have. Most public campaigns have probably half the donation size that yours does, and it really says something about what your campaign represents and what it represented to people, where they thought that this was. They really connected with the stance that you were taking. And that was just off the cuff. I'm looking at that, running the numbers in my head. I'm like, oh wow, you know what? That average donation size is actually people were actually giving more, a, a bit more, almost double what we see on other big public campaigns. What is that? Does that even say anything to you?
Yeah, well, and I think it's huge. I didn't really think about that, but no, I think it goes to show how important this is for people because and
Yeah,
how clear it is. Like what was happening in this case was so wrong because it's not only that they were weaponizing the justice system against someone who had done nothing wrong, but like in my case, I did what a doctor should have done. So
right.
they were criminalizing good behavior. And I
Yeah,
was standing up for that. And I think that people knew if we lost this fight, then that was going to be a very bad thing for their children.
right.
And, you know, when I saw all these donations, each single one was like, it was like a sense of, like, I have to honor the sacrifice of those people. Like these people believed in me. So, we made sure that we fought in the best way possible, that we didn't screw anything up. And my attorneys felt that too, because
Yeah.
ultimately we're the ones who are paying my attorneys, and like the work they produced was unbelievable because like, we kept a very slim team of only four attorneys, one paralegal. And, I would say, our primary attorney, Marcella Burke, had probably billed like less than 50% of like what she really,
Oh
I mean,
wow,
probably way less. I mean,
wow,
she was working for free, and then our other attorneys too, like, really, really discounted. And
wow.
even with that, it was still $2 million, which is ultimately is like a very good deal for this kind of case because the government was so corrupt and did everything they could to bleed us dry.
Well, I
And
think you're saying well, one of my questions was, how do you think a platform like GiveSendGo, a platform that's based in freedom and people being able to operate freely with their money and their donations, how is it platforms like GiveSendGo are changing the landscape for people facing legal or political persecution? Because this never existed before, and we're here now. What are your thoughts around that? How do you think we're changing the game?
well, I mean, think about to that moment in January 2024 when I took the story public, like part of that calculus, like no joke, there was two things in the calculus that had like the really, really significant impact. It was Elon Musk buying X and
Mm.
then GiveSendGo. We were like, all right, if we have these two things, we can tell the story and then maintain our defense fund. If there was only one, we wouldn't we would have
Yeah.
made the calculation different. So it's like it's completely changed. I mean, there's no way, it's like a whole different landscape. It hasn't only
Right.
changed it, it's created a new landscape because before it's like you go on GoFundMe, you're all that everything people donate to you is going to be stolen,
Right.
right? By
Yeah.
these criminals. And then in your case, it's not.
Yeah.
So you actually have a chance. So the only reason I was able to fight back was those two things.
Yeah.
And that's it's like this God's providence, right? It's like in our
Yeah.
story, I feel like there's so many instances of God's providence where it's things kind of work out at the best possible moment. And when we are like, all right, we have to fight back, we have to do everything we can. But like, we look out into the environment, the landscape around us, but
Yeah.
there's the two perfect things that we need in order to fight this successfully.
Yeah. So you mentioned God's providence. How has this journey uh, played a role with your faith? I mean, obviously, there's you're talking a little bit about it, but what have the big impacts been?
Yeah, I had always believed in God, but
Mm,
you know how there's always these expressions where, if you live by God's covenant, then he rewards his friends and punishes his enemies, right?
right.
And a lot of times it's easy for people to lose faith because things don't necessarily go their way. But I think in this case, uh, we every step of the way we fought back. We stood up for what was right. Even when I was facing jail and prison at the very end, I was like
Right.
12 hours away from the judge sending me to jail for violating his
Yeah.
fake gag order. Like I was very close, but I put my faith in God, and then every single time,
Yeah.
no matter how bad things got,
Yeah.
you know,
Well, it's
he
the it
protected
is
us.
the yeah, no, I mean it really it reminds me these are the present day stories. These are the Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego moments. I don't know if you know the story in the Old Testament. They're being told you need to bow down. They're like, we're not going to bow down. And even if God doesn't show up for us, we're still not bowing down to you because it's
Yeah.
not the right thing to do. And so he threw him in the fiery furnace. And what does God do? God comes along and he rescues them. And he's in the fire with them and they're not harmed. I think we're living in moments where those stories are coming. We're seeing those stories
Yeah,
in
and
life.
this is that story
Right.
because we were living in that fiery furnace for years, for like 2 years. And we were in it, but then each time we thought that we were going to be consumed by the flames, God had brought us out. And we knew that like only if we fight a little bit harder, a little bit longer, then we will be saved. You had to get burned. You had to be damaged in some way.
Yeah.
But it's kind of like the phoenix, right? It's like you get burned, you get destroyed, but then on the other side of it, you arise from the ashes and you become something better. Because
Yeah.
like my wife and I never thought we were able to do something like this,
Yeah.
but it was only from the destruction of our former selves were we able to become who we are today.
Yeah.
And that's who we want to be. Just in the middle of all this, we had our first daughter, you know, and
Yeah.
that's the people we want to be to raise her so
Well,
that she
yeah.
can
I
have
mean,
an
I,
example.
I I used to have a pastor, and he used to say, "Another level, another devil." But the point behind it was that you go through defeating the boss, if you want to put it like in video game terms, you defeat the boss so that you can go on to defeat the next bigger boss. Like the purpose is ultimately to advance the kingdom. Is to actually take the goodness that God has inside of you and bring it to a greater reality. And your greater reality is that you're having life flow through you, and that's your children, and you're having this new opportunity of this refound faith moment of saying, no, I'm seeing God's work in my life, and now I can instill it in my children from a greater standpoint because I've actually witnessed it in my own life. And that's such a powerful thing to be able to do, because life, as what you're rescuing these kids by being a whistleblower from them mutilating kids, that they're literally cutting off life is what they're doing. Like, you
Yeah.
can't have kids after this. It's just
Yeah.
crazy. Yeah.
And it's not it's like they're inverting the meaning and the possibility of happiness in life,
Right.
kind of creating like this slow motion death
Yeah.
as these individuals who are transitioned are really just turned into chronic medical patients where
Yeah.
like who they
Yes.
were born as is slowly drained from them because the first act in transitioning is to give up who you were born as and now refer to that as your dead name, right? It's a
Yeah.
dead name because the person you originally were is now dead.
Yeah.
And it's funny because how you bring up the levels where when you defeat one, you have to go after the other. I mean, it's perfect in my case because like the first level was like the prosecutor and her corrupt indictments. And it took us months to untangle her web of lies, to make her look completely foolish in front of the court. And then it was only once I exposed the fact that her entire family was so conflicted with Texas Children's and Baylor, right? The victims in the indictment,
Right.
that she had to step down from the case, right? So like the person who was torturing me, I had uncovered the fact that her entire family was, personally and financially connected to the people who were involved in the indictment, right? And
Yeah.
then the next person was the judge, and then the judge tries to destroy me with gag order, and that was the ultimate fight of this case, because the most corrupt thing was the gag order.
Yeah.
And at the end of the day, when at the last possible moment, right, I spoke out in defiance of it, and everything came to a head that very last day. And then, but we finally beat him. And now the thing is, it's on to greater, challenges, greater enemies. And
Right.
it's like the movement itself, or the people who are behind the thing, uh, uh, in the first place.
Right. Yeah. No, completely. Um, so lots of lessons learned. It's obvious like you've come through a whole lot of trials. You've learned a lot of lessons. You're in some ways on the other side of some elements of it, and you've still got things like you said in front of you. You've learned lessons so that you can take the bigger giant down. I think that there are still big giants to be taken down. There's still a lot that's going on in these places. Um, if you could, well, first, I do want to mention for people that will be watching, just to get it out there, because I see your campaign is still active. People are still donating. I mean, there's
Yeah.
still donations coming through. So www.givesendgo.com/Texas underscore whistleblower is the URL. Givesendgo.com/Texas underscore whistleblower. Donations are still coming through. You did mention that you have some legal debt still there that you're dealing with, so people can continue to donate. They can continue to send a prayer message of encouragement to keep pressing on. But I just wanted to bring focus to that for people, that they could continue to engage with your campaign on that level, and they can share it. Like, let people know that it's still available. Those are all great things that you can do to help. Is there any other way that you want to direct people to ways that they can support you? Give, Send, Go campaign. What are some other, where can they follow you online? What are some of the other ways that they can stay in touch?
It's just, yeah, the Give Send Go is the primary one, and then it's just my first and last name on X.
Okay.
And that's pretty much it. Yeah, it's after we pay our legal bills, it's kind of like, because we still owe so much, but then we just kind of plan on getting on with the rest of our lives.
Yeah, no,
So
it's one step at a time. That's the way that it works. It's just there's a lot of biblical references that I've been seeing in repetition on running with endurance. And the reason why you need endurance is because it's not about a destination, it's about the process. And endurance is part of the like stick to itiveness during the process. If you give up, it doesn't matter. You got to endure. Just keep enduring. Endure to the end. Keep going. And
yeah,
that's the admonition to you. Continue to endure, just like we're going to do at Give, Send, Go. We've been in the midst of a whole lot of stuff ourselves. We've got a $300 million lawsuit from the Canadian truckers that we're dealing with. We've got all of these craziness, and we're just going to continue to endure, and push forward and take the next giant down.
yeah, sounds good. Yeah, $300 million lawsuit. That's crazy. That's like a
Yeah, that's what I thought. Particularly when they put my name specifically on it as one of the primary defendants. I was like, wait a second, what's going on?
yeah.
How are you getting away with this? But like we live in a
Weren't they the ones who stole your money?
it's the
Or
nonsense of the scenario is one, we the funds like we sent about 3-4 million of the funds to the Canadian trucker organization, and the government ended up seizing them in a court order, and they took them so that they couldn't use them. So, and then we just said, well, we're not releasing any more money, even though they wanted us to. And we said, we're going to refund the rest. So we ended up refunding the rest of the money back to the givers to protect them. But so then none of the money ever made it to the truckers. So you're suing us for honking horns in Canada because there was a nuisance. I'm like, but how does that affect? What is it? What do I have to do with that? What does the GiveSendGo have to do with this? It's crazy, but it's like, well, you know what? Let's just sue because we can sue. The fact that the judges allowed this to go on or allow us to be added to the lawsuit again goes to some of the things that we're seeing even in all the media right now is judges that are like judges stepping in and usurping executive action and like all of these things. It's activism from the judiciary, and there does need to be some cleaning house. Like you can't you have to stay within your lane on some level. This is just crazy.
Yeah. And the judge in the case in your situation, just like the one in mine, it's like to be able to bring a case that's so absurd, that has no
Right.
basis in reality. Yeah. Like the idea of listing you guys on that suit is just simply for punishment because they know what that means, right? Like they have infinite resources
Right.
and the defendants have limited resources.
Right.
So even though the case is meaningless, they have no basis for it. The process is the punishment, and that's
Yes.
ultimately their goal because these are people who don't they have no shame.
Yep.
So, right, they can do whatever they want because they have no shame.
Right.
And then they have unlimited resources. So you combine those two things, that's a deadly combination to people like us.
Yeah, yeah, and their unlimited resources are my own tax dollars getting funneled through the government through departments like USAID back to
Yeah.
NGOs to fund it. Like this is the craziness, absurdity of the
Yeah.
world that we
We're
live
funding our own persecution.
in.
That's
Yeah,
essentially what it is.
yeah, no, it's been what's happening. I'm so glad that there's like some that the curtains being ripped back and some exposure is happening here because it has been uh, it has been a crazy fight, and I do think that this will again level the scales, level the balance because there is value to the both sides of the political spectrums. Like it's not like it's just one or none or something like that. Like this battle needs to happen because like it creates a center movement to truth and then for society to move forward. The tension of both sides. But for so long it's been one-sided because they've been doing these underhanded things, and like you said they have no shame, and so there's no like conviction. It's like, well, I'll do the evil I need to do in order to get my way because I think it's the greater good. It's like they're just misplaced. And yeah.
Yeah. I mean, it's an ideology of chaos and destruction,
Yeah.
something that has to be, limited in a civil society to the extreme fringes. I
Yeah.
mean, we have to retake the kind of center movement of politics and move these people way off to the side because it has no place in our society. I mean, and there can be no compromise with them too,
Yeah.
because it's
Yeah.
never the middle ground between one evil and good, but rather the elimination of evil, right?
Yeah. Yeah. All right. Well, this has been a fascinating conversation. You've let me take up almost an hour of your time. I appreciate that. It's been a great conversation. Great to see you again. Great to touch base. I'm sure we will see each other at some other moment in the future. It just happens that way. Um, but yeah, let's say best of luck. But I don't want to say luck because it's a lot of just doing what you know you need to do, and you're doing that. So keep doing what you're doing. And again, for those that are listening, givesendgo.com/Texas underscore whistleblower, and you can support Eithan's Give Send Go campaign there. Continue to give, share, pray, all of the above. Follow him on X. And anything else, anything that you would like to finish off saying to everybody?
I think that if there's one thing people should take away from this story, it's the power of even the most common person, people like my wife and I,
Mm,
to fight back against the most powerful forces in our country. You can fight back and you can win, and you can come out the other side better than you went in.
that's it. Well, thank you, Doctor. It's been a privilege.
All right. Thank you.
Yo.